Baroness Warsi has done an interview on Sky TV, and it's incredibly powerful. And she makes a lot of the points that I've been making consistently. I remember meeting her when we were both on the Steph show on Channel 4, and she is a compelling and principled and focused individual. So she talks in this interview. You have to wait to the end. I'm going to play the whole lot. You have to wait to the end. She's asked about Suella Braverman, and she is corrosive and chillingly cutting about her. She calls her divisive and dangerous. She says she doesn't fix things, she breaks things. She doesn't bring communities together, she pushes them apart. She pointed out that there are many people in her party, in the Conservative Party now, who project as patriots, but they are in fact arsonists. And she refers a number of times to the way that Suella Braverman plays culture wars, and she didn't need to raise this issue about the cenotaph. The police had said the marches were elsewhere. She has turned this into a political battleground. She has ramped up the atmosphere, the emotions to fever pitch, and she's made policing significantly harder. I think that she is directly responsible for the Just Stop Oil attack on the cenotaph yesterday. I think that is a response to her provocative rhetoric. I think this is a person who should go, and to hear a former chairman of the Conservative Party making it so abundantly clear that this is a divisive and unprincipled and dangerous Home Secretary, to hear somebody from formerly a member of the Cabinet, a senior member of the Conservative Party, speaking so openly, I think is welcome, and I think it suggests that Rishi should act quickly and soon and decisively. I hope he does. I hope he's actually got the guts to do that. I fear he's thinking that there's not very much time to change tack at this point, and he's probably looking around to see who on earth could possibly replace her, who is like her. That's not the question he should be asking. He should be asking who is not like her. Anyway, please listen to what Baroness Warsi.
Well, we can speak now to the former Conservative Minister, Baroness Warsi. Thank you so much for being on the programme. We've been talking there about the protests, which I do want to get to on. But first, I just want to talk about the situation in Gaza. You know, the Hamas-run health ministry is saying 10,000 people are now losing their lives. I mean, your heart just breaks, doesn't it, for the people killed in the attack in Israel, the children, civilians dying in Gaza. What are your sort of reflections?
I mean, we're a month into this now, and I was looking at some figures today, and more Palestinian children have been killed by Israel in 21 days than Ukrainian children were killed by Russia in 21 months. And that gives you a sense of magnitude of the lives that have been lost, both in Israel and in Palestine. And there is no way that we can sit here and justify and watch this unfolding before our eyes and not find the moral authority to say enough. If bombing was the answer, Sophie, then this has been going on for decades. And as I keep saying, and as I said in 2014 when I resigned from my job in Cabinet on precisely this issue, that until the occupation comes to an end and until we have a political solution which implements our stated policy of two states for two peoples, Israel will never be secure and Palestine will never be viable. And so the question that I keep asking my colleagues now is, well, after this appalling killing comes to an end, and it will have to come to an end, as it always will, what next? Where's the political process? Where's the humanitarian response? I mean, we haven't even appointed a special envoy for humanitarian needs in the Middle East, as the US has done nearly 2 weeks ago.
Do you think the UK government's response has been lacking then?
I think the UK government's response has been lacking. I also think that it's emboldened Prime Minister Netanyahu, a Prime Minister who is mired in allegations of corruption, who has led a cabinet with a self-confessed fascist and a convicted terrorist, whom Israelis for months and months in their thousands have been taking to the streets and saying this man is not good for Israel.
I think there's many people who would say, look, we're not fans of Netanyahu, we don't support his policies, but Israel has to react to what happened, the terrorist attack by Hamas, where we saw men, dads, mums, babies being slaughtered. And I guess just to put the opposite point of view, how should Israel react?
I think there is no doubt that Israel had to react. But if I was Israel's Prime Minister, my first concern would have been the hostages. I would have found ways to get those hostages out. An indiscriminate bombing of northern Gaza is not the best way to guarantee that the hostages are going to survive and are still alive. Some of the most strongest testimonies came from the families of the victims of those that were killed or taken hostage by Hamas, who said, do not weaponize our grief. We have lost who we have lost. Those that have been taken hostage, get them back. I've spoken directly to families whose loved ones have been taken hostage. And there is real despair, both here in the UK and in Israel. There are protests happening outside Netanyahu's house, and Ehud Barak came out and said this has been the single biggest failure of his premiership.
And this is the crunch bit of her interview where she turns to discuss Suella Braverman.
Talking about protests in the UK, there's a very live debate in Westminster about the policing of those protests. We just heard their Baroness Neville-Jones saying that she's worried about them effectively fostering extremism. Do you have concerns about the protests, and should the police be taking a heavier approach to them?
I think there are some things we need to say. Israel is not Netanyahu, the Palestinian people are not Hamas, and the protesters on the streets of London are neither protesting for Hamas nor are they hate marchers. I think this really clunky way of trying to kind of put everybody together into these groups and then set up these tribal rivalries is something that the government's got to stop doing. I've spent the last 48 hours talking to the organisers of the protest. I've spoken to people within the military. I've spoken to people within the Met to see where this is all going to eventually.
What do you make of Suella Braverman? She told our correspondent Ali Fortescue anyone who vandalises the cenotaph on a protest should be jailed faster than their feet can touch the ground.
Sophie, as somebody whose grandfathers both served in the British Indian Army, who served in the wars, somebody whose great uncle was taken prisoner of war, somebody who still has family serving in our British Armed Forces, there is nobody like my family who understands the value of the sacrifices that were made and the value of our armed forces and the value of the cenotaph. And that's why what disgusts me is that these protests had been planned for weeks. They were in discussions with the Met Police for weeks. The route was well away from the cenotaph for weeks. And yet last week, the Home Secretary decided to embolden and make this a political issue, to embolden the far right, to make this a political issue, knowing full well, and she'd been briefed by the Met, of what the route of the march was going to be and the fact that they didn't have concerns at this stage. She has now made this a live political issue.
Why do you think she's done that?
Because that's the way she operates, right? She fights culture wars. She doesn't fix things. She breaks things. And so I have been speaking to the protesters and I've been saying to them, when your Home Secretary starts to become dangerous and divisive and isn't keeping communities together, then communities need to step up and be the responsible ones. And if that means that you have to think about postponing, then you're going to have to be the adults in the room.
You think she's
one
dangerous,
of the things, I think she's dangerous and she's divisive. If you look at her rhetoric, it is always about pitching A against B. I've said this before, we have now, sadly, some of my colleagues in government who project as patriots, but they are indeed arsonists. They set this country alight. They pit community against community. They create these fires, and that is not the job of a government. The job of a government is to keep us all safe, and you do that by creating a sense of ease, not by fighting culture wars. So the question for us now is, and when I've been speaking to the protesters, the question for them now is, if we postpone, and they were in discussions with the Met on this, What happens when formal organisations step away from an organised march and we end up with informal groups, of which many have made arrangements to travel down here? So there's no proper policing, there's no proper management, there's no formal umbrella bodies. Do we create a more difficult situation on Saturday than if we continued with a formal march? So my advice to them has been, if you can postpone in a way which effectively means the police can police any fringe groups that may then fill that vacuum, that would be a good approach to take. But what we don't want to do is formal organisations to step back and make the job of the Met Police far harder, and all because the Home Secretary decided to make this a political issue and fight yet another culture war, a war that she didn't need to fight.
Okay, strong words. That's time. Thank you very much for being on the programme.
There were more members of the Conservative Party who I know feel like this. I wish there were more who were brave enough to actually go out onto the television screens and speak out and speak clearly, as Baroness Warsi has done. I know there are more. If more people spoke out, then the reign of this divisive and appalling Home Secretary would be over. But one's got to realise, of course, she is simply carrying on the work set up by a similarly divisive and appalling Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and they in turn are carrying on the work of Theresa May, who set up the hostile environment in the first place.